Hi, everyone. Today on Why Do Pets Matter, I have the good fortune to speak with David Hoffman. He is the Boston Collaborative, as well as a lecturer at Harvard, but he has written on bringing peace into the room, and his new book, Breaking Impasse. We had such a phenomenal conversation because now he's bringing his dog Bella in the room, and her batting average for resolving conflict is 100% or 1,000%, as he put it. So let's go see what David had to say. And boy, was it a great conversation. Hi, everyone. Debra Hamilton. So glad you're here with us on the next episode of Why Do Pets Matter? Today we are going to interview, and I'm so lucky and so glad to have David Hoffman here. He has been quite an idol to me as a mediator. He is the founding partner of the Boston Law Collaborative, as well as the John H. Watson Jr. Lecturer of Law at Harvard. David, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, there's so much we have to talk about because not only do you use pets in your mediation, but all in your practice, but also you have a new book out that I don't want to forget to mention because I just got back from a Congress, and boy, could we have used your new Impasse book throughout the Congress. So I'm looking forward to talking about it. But as we always do, David, we ask our guests one question: why do pets matter to you?
Great question. And I guess my answer has two parts, personal and professional. And the uh, my dog Bella and my cat Rosie are sources of uh, warmth, both literally and figuratively. As they gather around each evening, my wife and I we usually watch a show or a movie, and they're crowding my lap, and I love it. Um, so that connection with other beings and the larger, natural world is part of my personal answer to your question. On the professional level, I first heard about bringing a golden retriever, and my dog Bella is a golden retriever, into mediation from Jim Malamed, who's a mediator in Oregon. And he reported great success. And I thought that makes so much sense. And since I've always wanted to uh, have a golden retriever, as when the pandemic hit, I found a golden rescue from Serbia, of all places. And Bella has been part of my life, my family's life, and now my mediation practice. Um, I've been stunned at how her effect on mediation. And I had a mediation last week in which I said to the parties, Bella is batting 1,000. Every single mediation in which she's participated has settled. And it's funny. I think that they sort of felt the pressure of not wanting to break Bella's streak because it's hard not to like a golden retriever.
Yes, it is.
And
It's hard not to, right?
yeah, and that's not to say other breeds
And a
aren't.
dog of
Yeah.
any kind, or a cat,
Yes.
if you're a cat person. So
Yes.
absolutely. So I was just intrigued because we had talked, and you had given a lecture that I listened to. And when you said, yes, I bring Bella to my mediations, it's funny that I've been doing that since 2010. And you're absolutely right. Bringing a pet to a mediation often brings the tension down.
Yes. It does. And, there is a scientific explanation for this, and much has been written about the way in which cortisol levels go down and oxytocin levels go up when you pet a dog. And it happens not only in the people, but it happens in the dog, which is one reason why they like that kind of attention. At least, most dogs do, in my experience. But it has a number of other effects that I think are important. And one of them is that even if the parties in the mediation don't like each other very much and they have various grievances directed at each other, um, it's kind of a bonding experience for them to see the dog go back and forth, and they're both petting the dog, and it works in somewhat the same way that serving food in mediation works. It's a very human experience. We
It's a
all need
gathering.
to eat. Pardon?
It's a gathering. It's a
Yes, it's
gathering. Instead of a terrible meeting you don't want to be at, it
right.
turns into a gathering.
Exactly. And they're having a common experience, which is always a good bonding experience. And it also underscores in a very subtle but I think impactful way our common humanity and the common experience and feeling of enjoying, petting a dog, paying attention to the dog, and the dog's paying attention to us. And it allows people to see each other more three-dimensionally. This is not just the employee that I fired or the company that, canned me. This is a person who kind of likes dogs, and
Can't be all bad if the dog likes him.
exactly. And, this may sound, I don't know, self-aggrandizing. I hope it doesn't. But I have the feeling that because they like Bella so much, that it rubs off on me. Like they say, well, this is a really nice dog, and David is raising this really nice dog. That gives me a little bit of credit for being a good person. Because they're, mostly, in most cases, just meeting me for the first time. Who is this person? Is he a well-intentioned person? Well, he does a good job taking care of this lovely
If the
dog.
dog likes him, maybe we should like him.
Exactly, exactly. So, I, I mean, I would like to think that they would like me for myself without the credibility boost that my dog gives me. But, when you're in a tough mediation, anything that helps, uh,
Anything that helps.
yes,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
So you've done a lot of mediations in your lifetime, and Bella's only been with you for the last 6 years. Have you really seen that much of a difference? Because I know that when we were doing them in person instead of over Zoom, and I would ask if my dogs could come, and my dogs, probably Bella's like this too, they would be so neutral. They would go back and forth. They didn't stick
Yeah.
with one person. And sometimes if one person seemed
Yeah.
a little upset, they might give them a little more attention. Have you found that with Bella?
Absolutely. And I know that dogs, science tells us that dogs, because they have such extraordinary capacity for smell, can tell people's stress levels because we emit various, olfactory signals, stress, and they've been, uh, their evolution has inclined them to take care of people. And,
And
so
notice when we need them.
exactly, exactly. Now, I don't have a sensitive enough nose to tell what's going on in that realm. Of course, humans generally don't. Um, but regardless of whether that phenomenon is going on in the mediation room, the point you're making, I've definitely experienced, which is they are very impartial. They or omnipartial. They like all the people in the room. And so I think that has an effect too when they see the dog paying equal attention. Um, so I want to just mention one other personal benefit, and this is a benefit I get from Bella, not from my cat, and that is exercise. I think we all know that exercise in the middle of the day is a good idea. Once you have a dog, it's not optional. The dog needs to go for a walk, and so that means that I need to go for a walk. And that too is a good thing to get us out of the Zoom box that we're in for much of the day.
And let me know if when you do that, because I sometimes find that if I take a break, I sometimes don't mediate for more than 2 hours because when you're mediating conflicts between people over animals, it's really emotional because the animal is the subject of the turmoil. Often I find that if I get out and walk, or if we all get maybe out to take a walk and just walk, it it gives us the opportunity to think, as you said, outside the box, but not just the Zoom box, the box that we've put ourselves in because we're sitting still.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned about disputes involving pets, because something occurred to me about why they are so bitter. And I have found that they often are. And it seems odd because here's this creature that both parties love, deeply love. And sometimes the disputes over the pets are even harder to resolve than with their kids. And it occurred to me this morning that one of the reasons is that at least once kids get beyond a certain age, they can communicate about their preferences. Whereas with dogs, each of the two owners is sort of intuiting what is in the quote the best interest of the pet, and so they don't have. It's not as easy to achieve verification of their assertion of what's best for the pet. Um, and I've been struck by how many really complicated issues come up with pet ownership. So it's not only that the conflict is intense, but there are, for example, end of life issues that come up with pet ownership that, of course, don't come up with kids unless the kid has a terminal illness or something, but that hardly ever happens. But with pets, it's almost always the case that the owners are going to outlive their pet. And, as we all, any of us who have aging parents or have had aging parents, or if we ourselves are, aging to a degree where we're starting to think about what does the end chapter, the last chapter look like, what could be more emotionally wrenching than having to negotiate what will be the decision making and the circumstances of your pet's passing. It's making me sad just talking with you about it. And it's part of each of these mediations in which the ownership and care of pets play a role.
And I also find that it seems to me that they have to be right. So I have to be the better owner. Now, when they lived together, they both took care of the pet in different ways, but the pet thrived. And yet, when they are at this, that's why I always say make the pup nut before you hate each other, because it's
Yes,
so much easier. Because once you lose that ability to appreciate what David brought to Bella's life and what Debra brought to Bella's life, once you lose that appreciation, it's then a fight to the death that I'm the better owner. And I always remind my owners that are there fighting over the pet. I go, unfortunately, Bella doesn't hate David or Debra. You wish she
yeah,
would, because then it would be easy. She'd never ever want to see either of them. But pets really thrive on living with, I mean, your wife is just as important to Bella as you are, and you're just important to Bella as your wife is. And so to remove one um has an effect on them. So when
right.
it was interesting. I did a program with you probably know Judge Cooper. He was the Travis v. Murray case down in New York. And I said to him, I appreciate that you made, his history. And what would happen to, I think the dog's name was Frankie, if, say, something happened to the person he awarded the dog to?
Yeah,
I said, because, Frankie loved both of them.
right,
And if
right.
something happened to one, why wouldn't the other one be the
Yes,
person in line to get the dog? I don't know how you feel about that. I often think now with the 9 states, Massachusetts not being one of them, but probably thinking about it, having judges decide best interest of pets. I'm like, oh my God, that is so hard. You should mediate first, Judge. You should say, listen, I'll make that decision on best interest, but not until you mediate and try to decide yourself, because who knows what's the best interest for Bella
yes,
better than you and your wife, right? I don't know how you feel
yeah,
about that, but for me, everybody was so happy that judges were going to do that now. And yes, it did create a bigger place for that property, maybe more than property in our lives, because as you said, pets are such a force in our lives and should be more than just property.
yeah.
but I don't know that we made strides forward.
Yes. Well, when I talk with people about the what's going to happen with their kids, one of the things that I emphasize is, of course, the touchstone is best interest of the child, but we shouldn't forget the importance of that child in the life of each parent. The fact that it makes a big difference to each parent to have the time, quality time with the child. That's a legit interest to talk about in mediation. And I think the same thing is true with pet ownership. And one of the things that happens in mediation, in divorce specifically, um, is that it's usually one person who has been the initiator of the divorce. Not always, sometimes mutual, but I would say the substantial majority of the cases that I'm involved in involving marital separation and divorce, or breakup of a romantic partnership. Um, One person has come to the conclusion sooner than the other that this is not working. And often the one who doesn't want the divorce would, immediately take the other person back if they could. And so then the question is, well, since I'm leaving this person, maybe the more humane thing to do is to allow this person to be the primary parent for the dog, and there are visitation opportunities and so forth. And I think that's a very understandable reaction. Um, However,
However, I was going to say that
yes,
hasn't been my experience.
yes. Well, yes. I mean, sometimes people aren't that generous. And also, it may be that one of the parties is going to be living in a situation that's really just a much better
Right,
environment for the pet.
right.
So,
What I always say, you want to get it right for the pet, not just
yes,
their best interest, but you want to get it right for the pet. What's in the best interest of this pet? You got to get it right over being right. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So I want to mention a couple of other things that are related to what we've been discussing. And one of them is making sure that the parties are not allergic or don't have any phobias about, with regard to the pet that you want to bring to the mediation. And so far, knock on wood, I haven't had any
Yeah.
problems of that kind. But obviously, being sensitive to that is important. The other thing that occurs to me is that the physical environment generally in which we mediate has a big impact. So for years, I wanted to have a place to mediate that was on the Boston Harbor or, beside a lake or some other body of water because of the calming effect, or a place that has a big, view of the landscape around, something that would connect us to the natural world and help us see the conflict that we're in the broader perspective that sometimes enables people to make a breakthrough and resolve their dispute. I had the good fortune of just in the last few years moving my office to a place in Newton, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston, and it's right next to the Charles River, and there's a waterfall right outside my office window. And I make a point of asking the parties in the mediation to, take a look at the Charles River. It winds all the way through the greater Boston area, winds up in the Boston Harbor. And because I want to remind them that, yes, we have this conflict, but we are all inhabitants of this big and often troubled world. And it kind of puts things in perspective. Well, even if we don't have the Charles River or the Boston Harbor or whatever, a big view outside our offices. And for many years, I didn't. Um, our pets bring some of that natural world
They
into the
do.
room. And I want to, and for those folks who are listening to your broadcast,
They're going to have to
um,
go to YouTube and see this because David's going to share a great picture.
yes, well, so what I'm showing here is a page from our Boston Law Collaborative website, and we have a page devoted to our team. And as you scroll down through the people of various different roles at Boston Law Collaborative, we get
There
to
she is.
Bella's page. And then if you click on Bella's picture, you get to a page where it not only mentions the fact that she's always willing to work pro
Pro
bono,
bono.
yes, um,
I
but
love that.
but it also provides links to some articles about dog assisted mediation. And there are three articles that I thought were particularly good. And so we listed them at our website. So if anyone is listening and as opposed to watching the video of this, it's BLC, Boston Law Collaborative .law, LAW. That's our website. And you can find Bella there.
Oh, I love that. I love those articles. I've read those articles and I never thought to put them up on the site, but that might be really helpful for people who are in conflict over animals in any area, not just in divorce, but in ownership and everything else that I work with. And also, I wanted to take just a minute because you and I had been talking before we got on. I was at a an animal law, animal welfare, animal rights congress this weekend, and I was carrying around your new book because impasse seems to be where we find ourselves most of the time when we're thinking about animal rights and animal welfare. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the book and how you see that possibly if influencing people who might have a litigious mindset to maybe reconsider.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, you know, the I think that um, changing the setting of a mediation, the physical setting, and the participants can sometimes unlock possibilities.
I love the
So,
river. I
yeah,
love the river because that's what I do. I have a river where my office is.
yeah, it has a tremendous effect. So let's just say that someone is listening to your, podcast and they don't have a dog. They do mediation, but maybe one of the parties does, and maybe parties would like to have the next mediation session in some other physical setting, and one of the parties can, bring their pet there, and so it doesn't have to just be the mediator who's supplying this impasse breaking participant to the mediation. Um, but one of the I find most useful techniques for resolving impasse is bringing other voices, particularly expert voices, into the mix. So, for example, with children, um, have you talked to the pediatrician, or is there a family therapist that your family's been working with? What outside sources of wisdom might be available? In the case of a pet, have you talked to your veterinarian about, what that person has seen, work well for pets? And sometimes they might say, "Well, I don't want to use the veterinarian because I think one of the parties has had more dealings with the veterinarian than the other." Okay, well, why don't you each pick someone that you view as an expert on animal welfare and see if those two people can agree on someone that they think is, impartial and knowledgeable. And sometimes bringing another participant into the process can help generate some ideas that nobody in the room had previously thought of, including the mediator.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting to be able to ask them if there's someone, maybe a dog walker. How does the dog walker see the dog? Because sometimes, I often say to people when they say they never want to see their ex again, and that's why they have to make a clean break and take the dog and be done. And I get it. I do. And does your dog feel the same way? And
Yeah.
if something happened to you, I know your family would take care of it, but would the dog prefer to see David instead of maybe your family? And how can we see whether or not I'm not a big fan of a week on, a week off, because that's pretty disruptive to the dog. And I'm sure you might feel the same way. But there are vacations, there are, business travel, there's all sorts of things that if we can, I always say, put on our big boy and big girl pants to really think about the pet and what's in the best interest of the pet, because Bella would love to see you, even if it isn't every day. She would love to see you. And a lot of animal behaviorists will say, well, that's very disruptive to the dog. And I don't know, I've been in dogs for 45 years, and I think you've had dogs before, Bella. And yeah, they miss you when you're gone and they love you when they see you, but it's not as traumatic as I think usually it
Yeah.
is. I mean, the animal behaviorist might, I would have two or three animal behaviorists look, because it really is. I'm just a real fan of the people who know the dog making that decision with the impact and information from experts, because
Yeah.
what you want to do is what's best for the dog.
Right. I think that dogs, particularly, and cats, I imagine also, are real masters of living in the moment, much more so than we
Are they?
humans are.
Yep.
Yes.
And they're
And
forgiving, all forgiving.
yes, very forgiving. And they also are, I think, more adaptable than kids are, and I think that's partly because for dogs, at least in my limited experience with dogs during my life, the most important feature of their environment is the human who is their, pack leader, so to speak. And it doesn't matter whether we're here in Acton, Massachusetts, which is where I'm broadcasting from, or down on the Cape, where I like to go when I can. Um, the main thing is, do I have my people with me?
Right.
If there's a divorce, if the, ownership changes, as you point out, they will be thrilled to see the person they used to be with. But I don't hear accounts of these marital separations causing, depression and in the pets, as long as they're continue to be well cared for. Now, I do know that when an owner passes, it predeceases a pet, it has a big effect, huge
Huge,
effect.
huge. And that's something that people really need to pay attention to. Um, Before we go, I can't believe
Yes,
almost a half hour is up. In your book, in the mediation terminology, we have the BATNA and the WHATNA, but you have a new one,
MLATNA.
MLATNA. So I'd
Yes,
love for you to explain that, because I laughed when I read it, because I said that's so perfect.
yeah. So MLATNA stands for most likely alternative to a negotiated agreement. And when the book Getting to Yes came out and introduced the term BATNA, best alternative, well, that works in a deal-making environment where if I don't make a deal with this person, then maybe I can make a deal with this other person.
Right.
But if you are involved in a case which ultimately is going to be decided in a court, if it's not resolved, then you don't have a choice of a different venue. You're stuck with the litigation venue that you're in and or that you're about to be in, because that's the court that has jurisdiction of the matter. And so the question is not so much what's the worst possible outcome, the WATNA, as you said, or
Right.
the BATNA, but what's most likely? What's the bell curve? If this case were decided 10 times, what would be the average result? And that's if you can get a result at the table that's better than that, then that's what we're going for. And I believe that especially with disputes over pets, um, it's almost always possible to come up with a more nuanced, more pet centric solution than one that's going to come out of a court. Because the judge has very limited exposure, if any, to the pet, usually none at all. Whereas the owners really know this pet and have much more expertise, much more knowledge about what would be in the pet's best interest.
And the law has less nuanced ability to address the needs of people who are arguing over
Right.
pets. I mean,
Yes.
it's cut and dry, it's black and white, it's the law, right? So I
Right.
have to do this because it's the law, but that might not be in the best interest of anyone. And so if you could try to find the MLATNA more likely outcome.
Yes, and the courts are very reluctant to decide disputes that are not yet ripe, so to speak. So if you go into court and say, Judge, we want to litigate the question of how end of life care will be handled, a judge's reaction might be, well, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, how this, pet's life will come to
Right.
an end, or whether it even will come to an end before the
You
owners.
do.
Exactly. So, but in a mediation or in a negotiation, the owners can come up with very thoughtful, nuanced ways to deal with that very important issue.
I always, when it's given to one party or the other, I often cringe because it's almost never given to the moneyed spouse because they're out working and the other spouse is home with the pet. So they give it to the one that's with the pet because that's the one the pet goes to because that's the one the pet spends most of the time with. And I always said, I have dogs and you have Bella. So Bella might go to you all the time, no matter what. If you were in Judge Judy's court and they let her in, she would run to you. But if you weren't there, she'd run to your wife and my dogs would run to my husband. So it's not
Yeah,
that they don't like your wife or my husband. It's just that, well, these people are the ones who put the bowl on the floor. So I'm
that's
going to go
right.
to them first. But when
Exactly.
they're not around, these people put the bowl on the floor. So they're pretty good too.
Yes, exactly. Well, I just want to, before we adjourn, I just want to say a big thank you for your leadership in this area, for your writing in this area, and for creating these podcasts. It's a real contribution to the field of dispute resolution, and it's really been a pleasure talking with you about this.
Well, I am so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful for your books that have kept me going in this because it's such an impasse laden. You would think that these big businesses and things would be tough, but as you said, because it's all emotional,
Right.
having an argument about a pet, people are completely irrational sometimes. I mean, completely irrational because they can't
Yeah.
think of their lives without their dogs. And you and I both know neither can we.
That's right. So one of the books that I worked on a long time ago called Bringing Peace into the Room,
I love that book.
there could be a sequel called
That's right.
Bringing Dogs into the Room.
That's
Uh,
right.
a,
Bringing dogs into the room to bring peace into the room
that's right.
times,
Exactly.
2.0,
That's
2.0.
right. Yes.
David, thank you so much for being here. I'm so
Welcome.
grateful you've been a guest. And until next time, everyone, kiss your dog, your cat, your bird, your horse, your lizard. I don't care. They're wonderful. This is Debra Hamilton and the Why Do Pets Matter podcast. Thanks for being here. 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict.